Hi, welcome to another episode of History in 7 Facts. In this show, we'll explore some of the most interesting things that we know or not know about our own past. In the second chapter of this series, we're going to discover some of the lost ancient worlds to see if we can find some interesting facts you may not know. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about something you probably never heard of. The fall of ancient Greece might be tied to their olives. We often talk about ancient Greece as the birthplace of Western society. But what happened to it? There are many reasons, many events that led to the demise of ancient Greek society, but there's one aspect that's often overlooked. Today, the general landscape of Greece is akin to an arid place with poor soil and not a lot of grassland, right? But that wasn't always the case. 2000 years ago, Greece looked nothing like it does today. Geological evidence suggests that the country's barren hills were once covered by grass, forests, and fertile soil. Even in ancient times, agriculture meant the destruction of natural habitats to make way for farms, but it seems that in Greece's case, that process was a major factor of their empire's demise. For the ancient Greek city-states, olives were a gift from the gods. Actually, just one god, Athena, and it was in many ways the perfect crop. The trees were tough and productive for years, the oil would not spoil for weeks, and it brought in huge amounts of money. And some of it was blood money. Most collected taxes came from the farming industry, which meant that most wars were largely financed by olive oil revenues. Olives were a treasure and were held in high regard. They were associated with purity, joy, victory, and honor. Even the Olympic athletes received crowns made of olive branches. So even if these olives were to have some negative effect on the environment, there was literally no stopping it. Through modern techniques, we can analyze soil particles trapped beneath the surface from ancient times. What they show us is that huge quantities of land were dislocated through landslides and erosion. But before that happened, Greece had a lush vegetation and large forests. The forests were cleared for farming, and the hilly areas were stabilized, like in many other areas of the world, through a system of terraces and crop rotation. But once olive came into the picture, crop rotation was abandoned. This was a problem. Most trees have a root system that spreads out horizontally and vertically, keeping the soil around them in place. But olive trees have a single root that grows deep into the soil in search for water. Without any roots to keep it in place, and without a crop rotation to ensure fertility, the top layer of the soil became very unstable. And on hills, that meant that those layers of fertile soil slowly slided downhill, leaving the exposed rocks and sand on top, which were no longer suitable for planting. The Greeks noticed that their lands were getting unstable, and they did have ways to counteract these effects by using ditches and terraces to keep the stability and irrigation of olive orchards. However, there was one issue. These terraces had to be maintained continuously. But Greeks were involved in many wars, and often these wars were between themselves. Athens and Sparta, for instance, would find themselves in conflict many times. Wars meant that soldiers would interrupt the normal maintenance of the fields. It also meant that more money was needed, which meant that more olives were needed. When farmers were unable to maintain their terraces or were conscripted into the army, the effects were devastating. In just weeks, the terraces would lose their integrity and the soil would slide down. But, just like today, the big players also had a role in this disaster. Large landholders didn't spend nearly as much time in taking care of the fields as regular farmers would. Olive trees could grow even in barren, rocky fields, and they had the time and money to wait for them to grow and produce. So why waste any money on keeping the damn soil in place? This of course meant that more and more land was only suitable for growing olive trees. By this time though, olives were no longer a problem, they were a solution. The increasing problem of a lack of food, coupled with the expansion of the population, meant that Greeks had to import more and more of their food. And the money came from, you guessed it, olive oil. You don't hear many people talk about this fact very often, because olive trees didn't directly destabilize ancient Greece. Instead, it was just one of the contributing factors that was gradually building momentum over the centuries. The beginning of the end of the ancient Greek society began in the Peloponnesian Wars between 431 and 404 BC. In this conflict, Sparta emerged victorious while Athens lost badly. And one of the reasons was because Athens was almost completely dependent on food imports. So when they lost their naval supremacy, they lost their food sources. The now degraded lands were unable to produce enough food, and Athens lost its might. In fact, it was completely devastated and never again regained its pre-war prosperity, while poverty was also widespread in Sparta. This marked the end of the golden age of Greece, and while there were many reasons for this, you can be sure that olives played a big role. By the year 100 AD, when the Roman Empire had already eclipsed and conquered Greece, it is estimated that less than 25% of the original fertile soils had survived. Most of that soil was washed away downhill in the plains and riverbeds. Amazingly, those layers can be identified by modern archaeologists, and in some cases they can even tie certain wars to the thickness of the layers, showing how the absence of farmers and maintenance during wars led to massive soil erosions. There is one more point I'd like to make. Once the fertile soil is lost, it's lost for good. Even today, with modern techniques, you can't bring back those lost layers. You can only try to create a new layer. But that is a very slow, very costly, and not as nearly as efficient process. So perhaps we should try and learn from our forefathers' mistakes while we still can. Thank you for watching this episode of 7 Facts. I hope this was interesting and informative, and maybe it even inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you liked this video, please thumbs up and subscribe. While you're downstairs, let me know what you think about this video. Please consider visiting my Patreon page and become a patron. The link is in the description. I hope to see you next time. Bye.